And then, hey everybody. So my name is BJ and I am the head of community for Hear Me. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm really excited, trigger warning, when we start talking about mental health and suicide prevention. I'm really happy that Hear Me is leaning into conversation and an opportunity to learn and have a discussion in an authentic way around things that are so sensitive and important. And just also like the little bit of etiquette. If you are coming in, just make sure that you are muted. There might be a chance later on to unmute yourself in the presentation. But I'm super excited also. I think that it's nice to add some transparency around the listeners that we have and the different skill sets. So I'm really excited to introduce Angelique Vargas, who is a current Hear Me intern through the MSW internship program, who came forward to present on this topic. So with that being said, Angelique, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, BJ. Hello to everyone. Thank you all for coming. I do want to say my son had to stay home from school today, so if you hear him in the background, I do apologize. Hopefully he keeps it to a minimum. But yes, I'm excited to be here today to talk to you guys about suicide and suicide prevention. Before interning with Hear Me, I did intern with Crisis Line through United Way, and that was a life-changing experience for me. Before that, I had only experienced suicide from my own personal. When I was 16, I attempted suicide, and I had a long history of like self-harming behaviors. So suicide's really close to home for me, and I'm happy that I've made it to this point in my life where I can now help other people and advocate for other people and educate other people. And yeah, just spread the message that, suicide is, sometimes people feel suicidal, but that's, it's not the only option. You can recover, you can get better, you can heal, it's possible, especially if we're here supporting each other, educating each other, and, just being that support system for people who need it. So hopefully this presentation will help you if you ever encounter someone who is suicidal, or if you're feeling suicidal yourself. Hopefully it'll give you some tips on how to respond, what you can do, how you can help. So share screen here. Can everyone see this?
Yes, we can.
Present. Oh my goodness, guys. Where is the present button? Okay, we might just stay like this. So, suicide, what we know and what we can do about it. September is Suicide Awareness Month. September officially became recognized as National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month in 2008. During Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline encourages folks to know the risk factors, know the warning signs, and be empowered to help through conversation or directing those who need support to crisis resources. And the National Lifeline number just changed this year, very recently, like within the past month or so. It used to be an 800 number, now it is just 988, and anyone can call that number or text that number. A lot easier than remembering the whole 800 number. So this is what we're going to be going through first. The first section is what we know about suicide. So it's important when talking about suicide that we define it correctly and that we use the correct terminology. So when I was growing up, I used to hear, the term committed suicide. We really don't like to use that term anymore, because when you commit to something, or like you see down here, complete, or you have a successful suicide, it doesn't sound right. We use those words for things that are like major accomplishments, like you committed to a job, you completed your degree. These words have positive connotations. So when we're talking about suicide and somebody dying by suicide, we do want to say it that way. either died by suicide or suicide death, as opposed to committed, completed, or successful suicide. Other terms: suicide attempt, attempted suicide, suicidal ideation, suicidal intent, non-suicidal self-injury. This one's kind of a new term to me: intentional self-inflicted harm to self without suicidal intention. So this could mean like people cutting themselves, harming themselves without necessarily having the intent to die by suicide. Even if that's what they're doing, we do want to monitor that. If you know somebody who's doing something like that, even if they're not suicidal just yet, it could lead to that. So you would want to monitor that. And then parasuicide. Excuse me. So in the US, suicide is the second leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 34. Suicide is the 12th overall leading cause of death. On average, there are 130 suicides per day, which is a lot. 70% of suicide deaths in 2020 were white males. About 53% of all suicide deaths were by firearm in 2020. And in 2020, 45,979 people died by suicide and 1.2 million made a suicide attempt. That's a lot of people. And these numbers, unfortunately, from the data that we have as of right now, they're either going up or they're staying about the same. So what we want to take away from that is that they're not going down. So we need to really be mindful of this information, mindful that suicide is a huge problem in this country, and be aware that when we can do something about it, we absolutely should. So more data from the US. 5% of all adults have reported having serious suicidal thoughts. 11% of people aged 18 to 25 also have. 19% of high school students have. And this rate is actually higher for American Indian and Alaskan Native students. Their highest rates of attempts were about 25%. So that's over a quarter of those students who have strongly considered suicide. Excuse me. For LGBT plus students, high school students, that number is even higher again at 45%. 54% of all Americans have been impacted by suicide. 72% of communities may be unprepared to provide crisis support. Both of those are very alarming numbers. That's over half of Americans who have been impacted by suicide. And again, when looking at these numbers, this is just what we know about. That number could be higher, it could be lower. But either way, even at 54%, that's a significant amount of people. And 72% of communities not being prepared to help those people is also a significant problem. Women are more likely to attempt suicide, while men are more likely to die by suicide. So the reason for that is women are more likely to attempt suicide using less lethal means. So women are more likely to, say, cut their wrists or overdose on pills. And while that can kill you, it's less likely to do so, especially if somebody finds you early enough and get you to a hospital. Usually they can help you and save you there. Whereas men are more likely to die because men tend to use more effective methods like firearms. So obviously, if you're choosing a firearm over, pills or something like that, you're going to be more likely to die. Transgender adults are 9 times more likely to attempt suicide. Suicide is the leading cause of death for people in local jails. Suicide is more common in rural, non-metro areas at about 2 times the rate. So if you're living like in a farm, away from a major city, away from a lot of people, basically if you're living more isolated, you're more likely to commit suicide. To die by suicide. And this is kind of hard to see, so I apologize, but this is basically showing by age groups where suicide is on the cause of death. And you can see for just about every age group, suicide is here. For some, it's higher than others. So for 25 to 34, 10 to 14, second leading cause of death. For 15 to 24, third leading cause of death. And then again, as mentioned earlier, it's the 12th leading cause of death overall. And this is just another way to look at that suicide rates by age. So our at-risk populations would be older adults have disproportionately higher rates of suicide compared to other age groups. This is especially true for men age 65 and older who face some of the highest rates. White men 85 plus have the very high rate. It is 4 times higher than the average US overall rate. Overall, adults make up only 12% of the population, but about 18% of total suicides. Older adults are more likely to plan carefully and use effective lethal means. This kind of goes back to what we were saying about men choosing firearms. And then with the planning, they're more likely to do this over a period of time. So whereas younger people, it might be like an event that triggers it, and they might just, kind of impulsively do it. Older adults are more likely to plan it out. A quarter of adults who attempt suicide will die by suicide compared to only 1 out of 200 youth. So in other words, if an older adult tries to die by suicide, they are more likely to actually do so. Older adults are less likely to recover from the effects of an attempted suicide. This could be due to their age. It could be related to the method that they chose. So say they do use a firearm, but they survive. As an older person, it's harder to recover from even just regular cold and sickness. So imagine causing a serious trauma to your body and having to recover from that. It's a lot harder for them to do. Older adults are also less likely to be discovered after dying by suicide. So, you can imagine a lot of older adults live alone, they're isolated. If they're feeling disconnected from family, friends, they don't have a lot of people checking on them, they might die by suicide, and it could be a while before anybody even knows. Other groups of at-risk populations include historically disadvantaged communities. This can include Indigenous communities, Black people, LGBT youth, and youth in general. For Indigenous communities such as Alaskan Natives, there is an awareness in their community that this is happening, and there are steps that they're taking to address this. One is the Indian Country Child Trauma Center that focuses on that population. Suicide rates have also increased among Black people, especially among young Black males. The Emergency Task Force on Black Youth Suicide and Mental Health was established in 2019 to help address this problem. LGBT youth are at higher risk for suicide. Research has shown that laws supporting the LGBT community can prevent suicide. That's really important. So for LGBT youth, it's important that we know that those suicide rates are more so related to what they experienced socially than it is what's going on with them internally. So in other words, if they had the support, if they felt okay being who they are and didn't have so much hate and vitriol coming from outside, those rates would likely go way down. Youth in general may be at higher risk for suicide under certain conditions. So we saw this in the 2020 pandemic, and we'll go into that more in a future slide here. So some warning signs for suicide. Talks about death, dying, suicide, suicidal thoughts, extreme guilt or shame. Sometimes people do that jokingly. Sometimes they'll say like, oh my God, we have this test coming up, I'm just gonna kill myself. And it can be a joke, but it can also be serious. If you hear a friend, a family member, somebody close to you talking like that, it doesn't hurt to ask and make sure that they're okay. And asking about suicide is not going to make them suicidal. That is a myth. It's better to ask than to not ask. History of suicide attempts or risky behavior, recent suicide attempts or risky behavior, recent and unusual change in behavior. That can include so many things. So do they look different? Are they talking different? Is engaging in behaviors that they don't normally engage in. You know, all those could be red flags that something else is going on. Recently experienced a serious loss. Um, and this could be especially true for like older couples. So if you're an older white male, for example, if you just lost your wife of 50 years, you may be feeling down, depressed, if you don't have kids or, you know, family coming to visit you, that could be a sign, you know, this person needs help. Changes in eating and sleeping patterns, withdrawing from friends, family, community, in other words, isolating. If you have a friend that used to go out with you all the time and now they're like, no, they're not answering their phone, not responding to text messages, check on that person just to be better safe than sorry. Losing interest in school, work, social activities, preparation for death, e.g., writing a will, giving away important belongings. Again, that can be especially true for older people. Say you go visit an older aunt or uncle and they're telling you, here, take this, take that, I don't need it anymore. And you're like, why wouldn't you need it anymore? Sometimes that's a sign that they're planning something. So do ask them. Extreme mood swings, agitated, aggressive behavior, increases in alcohol or substance use. Stop taking prescribed medication as it is prescribed. Again, that's another one we see in older adults more often. Increases in anxiety, depression symptoms, and this can be true for any age group. If you have a teenager who's already been diagnosed with depression and you see those signs getting worse and worse and worse, it's not going to hurt to ask them directly about suicide. And if you feel that they're not being all the way open with you or that you're not the best person that they want to communicate with, do reach out for professional help. Do suggest the 988 crisis line. There are other crisis lines that are for youth specifically, LGBT specifically. You know, find what works for that person and do your best to help them out. Some risk factors: mental and substance use disorders, history of trauma, abuse, or a victim of violence, historical oppression, lack of social emotional support and isolation, lack of access to resources, major physical illnesses, history of suicide attempts, losing someone to a death by suicide, alcohol misuse, feeling of hopelessness, criminal or legal problems, impulsive behavior, aggressive behavior, bullying. And with bullying, it could be either way. If they're being the bully or if they're being bullied, both of those can be signs that something more serious is going on. Community violence, job or financial loss, loss of relationship, a breakup, divorce, death, relationship conflict. Access to lethal means is a big one. As mentioned earlier, you know, some means are more lethal than others, like guns. If you have a family member, friend who you know has access to a gun and you know they're suicidal, please do discuss with them about keeping, you know, at least keeping the gun and the ammunition separate, maybe having a family member have a key to the lock or something, trying to make sure that they can't access it so easily can save their life. Stigma against mental health treatment, exposure to insensitive suicide-related media, and we'll go into that one a little bit more later. So this one was an interesting image. I hadn't really thought before about suicide being related to occupations, but some jobs do tend to show that they're high risk for having employees who may become suicidal. The top one is mining, quarrying, oil, gas extraction. So if you think about those jobs, those are high risk jobs already, just in terms of like danger. A lot of these people get health issues, breathing issues, a lot of time spent away from family and friends. It's very hard on the body. Construction is another one, automotive repair, agriculture, forestry, fishing, transportation, and warehousing. You know, all these jobs can put a man at risk. And they specifically went with men. I'm not sure if that's because this is a male-dominated field, but the rates that they're showing are for men. Suicide was also greater in the general population for construction, again, installation, maintenance, art, design, and entertainment, transportation, protective service, and healthcare support. So that can include some of us, if you're social work and psychology, doctor, nurse, any type of helping profession, you are at greater risk. It could be due to the trauma that you're going to be constantly facing. It could be due to work hours. It could be so many things, but just know that, if you know anybody in these industries, keep an eye on them. It won't hurt to do so. And if you work in any of these industries, keep an eye on yourself and be mindful of how you're feeling. Don't feel bad for taking care of yourself. Some protective factors: sense of hope, purpose, and worth, effective coping skills, effective problem-solving skills, alcohol and substance abstinence, help-seeking behavior, positive support systems and connection with others, pets, maintaining health and wellness, ability to access resources, availability of resources, strong family background, family cohesion, positive relationship with parents, faith-related objections to suicide. So that one basically means, like, if you're Christian maybe and you believe that suicide is a sin, that can be helpful to you. Reduced access to legal means, safe, stable home, community, societal environments, opportunities for community socialization and activity, and opportunities to support others. So these are all great things that we all should have, but we don't always all have that. When we do, it can help us, not be suicidal and not have poor mental health. When we don't, the exact opposite can happen. It can affect our mental health. It can lead to suicidal thoughts. So if you are working with someone or trying to help someone, you want to help them, reach some of these factors. So back to COVID-19 and suicide. So in contrast to alarmist predictions of increasing rates of suicide as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, overall rates actually declined or at worst stayed stable. So I remember back in 2020, I kept seeing on the news, kept reading articles that suicide rates were going up. But after 2020, when they actually pulled the numbers, they found that rates hadn't really gone up, that they had stayed the same or declined. But at the same time, for certain groups, Black people for one, and youth groups for another, those rates actually did go up. So looking back, I can say, I know 2020 was a stressful year for me with everything going on, with George Floyd and just everything that was going on that year, not just the pandemic itself, the virus, but everything going on socially, politically. It was a tough year. So I'm not sure if that's why rates went up for these groups specifically, or for that group specifically, for youth. I'm not sure if it was being out of school. But these are all things to look into, and I'm sure we'll get more information about that as the years goes on, what actually happened there. During that time, 1/3 of high school students reported poor mental health. 44% experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. Poor mental health and suicidal ideation was typically higher among LGBT students, females, Asian Islander, and Asian. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I think it's Asian Islander, Asian Pacific. I've got confused there. Teens and white teenagers. And for this group, the 2020 pandemic also did affect them in a certain way. There was a lot of Asian hate going on. We did get the passage of the anti-Asian hate bill, but before that, they were reporting increases of suicidal ideation. 20% of students seriously considered suicide and 9% attempted suicide, with mental health related ER visits for this group increasing significantly in 2020. And 46% of students felt close to peers at school. You have to wait a second, okay? and suicide in the media. So both fictional and real life depictions of suicide in the media can negatively affect viewer mental health and well-being. When done appropriately, media can help raise awareness about suicide, offer hope and stories of resilience, debunk myths, and encourage help-seeking behaviors in those who could use support. So one example that I know of, a recent example, was the show 13 Reasons Why. I didn't watch that show, but I know a lot of people who did, and I know a lot of people told me that there was a scene in the show that was extremely graphic, and I know that Netflix eventually pulled that scene. So that is a perfect example of how we need to be very careful of how we show suicide in the media. There's some links here that you guys will be able to refer to later, but I know one of the tips was to not go into too much detail showing how the person commits suicide or dies by suicide. So if you're ever in a media, working on a media project, you do want to follow the guidelines to make sure that you're not showing it in a way that may actually encourage people to copy what they're seeing versus get help if they need help. So what we can do. So suicide and stigma. Stigma surrounding suicide can be a barrier for individuals who wish to seek help but worry about judgment or lack of support. In other words, stigma can prevent people from getting help. So it's really important that we all address the stigma around suicide and do our best to decrease that stigma. We don't want people to feel like they can't talk to us about it or to feel like, they're going to be judged. We want to be as empathetic and as supportive and as understanding as possible and let them know that it is okay. And that, we can look at the rates and see that it's not uncommon. It's a leading cause of death. That right there should reduce the stigma. A lot of people have these thoughts, and unfortunately, some of those people do act on them. And to decrease that, we need to decrease the stigma. Stigma can come from family, peers, teachers, community leaders, coworkers, society at large, the media, and more. Individuals with suicidal feelings may also stigmatize the behavior themselves and may even express that through thoughts of shame or guilt. Individuals who perceive they are being judged by others may begin to judge themselves also. In other words, internalizing those thoughts. So if someone confides in you that they've been having suicidal thoughts or suicidal feelings, or that they've made an attempt, and you just kind of brush them off or say like, oh, no big deal, you survived, it's fine. They might internalize that and say like, oh, it's no big deal, I'm overreacting. But at the same time, they might still have those feelings, and if they don't address those feelings, they're likely to continue to be there. So we don't want to belittle or downplay any suicidal thought, even if it's a minor suicidal thought. We want to take it very seriously. Talking to people about suicide. So you want to ask them how they're feeling. You want to listen, be empathetic, be non-judgmental, be supportive. So that means doing the things that we just mentioned, talking, listening, but also helping them find resources. So, giving them the 988 number, giving them information for maybe a professional in their area who can help. Anything that can help them, even sending them to like another family member, another friend who maybe has some experience in this area and can help them a little better if you're not feeling prepared to do it yourself. Any of those things can be helpful. Do not criticize, shame, or guilt trip anyone. Help them explain how they're feeling. So sometimes people may have a hard time getting their words out. You can help them get those words out and just be that shoulder for them to lean on. That can make a world of difference for that person. And this one, explore with them reasons for living. This one is one that you can do, but be careful when doing it. For me personally, I recommend only doing that with somebody that you know really well. If you don't know them really well, I wouldn't do that. That's just because the reasons that you may think they have for living may actually be the reasons that they don't want to. So for example, you may say like, oh, what about your job? Don't you love your job? When really at their job, they're being harassed or bullied or something. And that's where some of these thoughts are coming from. So you want to know, when you give them reasons for living, make sure those are actually reasons that they want to live for. If the person is in crisis, ask how long they've been feeling that way and how severe is the feeling. So you could ask them on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 10, something like that. If they say 1 or 2, that's not so bad, but obviously still take it seriously. If they say a 3, this is getting more serious. If they say a 4, or especially if they say a 5, that is really serious. They may need some serious help. Ask if they have attempted suicide before, how many times and when. This can be really important too, especially if it's a recent attempt. If you ask them, have you tried suicide before? Like I told you all, I made an attempt when I was 16. That was 34 now, so that was a long time ago. But if I had said, oh, I just made an attempt last week, that would be more serious. That would mean it's probably still on my mind and I need help. Ask if they have the means they would use, and if so, remove them when possible. This is especially true for firearms, but it can be true for other things too. Another preferred method by men is hanging. So if they have a rope or electrical wire, something that could hold their weight, something that they could use, do try to remove that. Ask them if they have a plan to end their life. What is the plan and when is the plan for? Encourage help seeking. In other words, personal coping skills or professional assistance. Try not to leave them alone until they are safe whenever possible. And I say whenever possible because sometimes it won't be possible for you to stay. If for some reason you do have to leave, but someone is suicidal, please do try to get somebody else there with them, or at least maybe you can stay on the phone with them or do something so that they're not alone. Most people, when they do attempt suicide, they'll be alone when they do it, so we don't want to leave them. In an emergency, contact or transport the person to urgent care for psychiatric assistance. So again, if this person's at a 5 and they're having a hard time expressing their feelings to you, they seem really frustrated, agitated, they're not really sitting down to talk to you, you may need to reach out for professional help. Do be mindful, though, that this is going to depend on where you are. So here in California, unless the person is a direct danger to themselves or somebody else, like a clear danger, like they have threatened somebody, they are, wielding a weapon directly at somebody saying, I'm going to hurt you. Unless it's like that, we unfortunately can't send them, even when we sometimes really feel or really believe that they need to go. Whereas in other states you can. I believe Texas is one of those states where if you believe that the person is really a danger to themselves, they will take them. So just be mindful of where you are and how the laws work in your area. And you should be looking at how it is locally and how it is in your whole state. So active listening and emotional support are very important. We use those at Hear Me a lot. They're also very important when talking to somebody who is suicidal. Being an active listener means truly listening to the person speaking, giving them your full attention, and trying to understand what they mean and how they are feeling. Active listening can increase trust and closeness between the listener and the speaker. Excuse me. So you'll want to be attentive. This means eye contact, posture, where your body is pointed, etc. Paraphrase, to gain clarity and show you are paying attention. So, if they said, I'm really sad that my friend is moving away, you would say, your friend moved away. I understand you're feeling sad about that. Basically just rephrase what they said to show them that you are paying attention. Use empathy statements like, I can understand this must be really difficult for you. Reflect emotions. So you must feel really down. You must be feeling really depressed right now. Reflect back to them. It will keep the conversation going. It will also show them that you are listening. It will help them get those feelings off their chest. And sometimes just getting those feelings out can really just help somebody feel so much better. And don't be afraid of silence. Silence is okay too, especially in these kind of situations where it's high emotions, high tense. You don't know what's going on, what's going to happen next. Sometimes it's okay to just sit with each other. If you're really close with this person, hug them. If you're really, really close with this person, give them a kiss on the cheek, show them that you're there for them, that it's okay. So screening and assessment. So these are kind of professional tools, but I think really anybody could use them, and you don't have to like use it like print it out and sit with this person and like write it down. But you could review these just to get an idea of, if you were a professional, what questions would you ask them? What would you be looking for? And you don't have to be a professional. You can use this with your child. You can use this with your spouse. You can use this with anyone you think needs it. Um, it doesn't hurt to try to help. And this is going to be really hard for you guys to see, but this presentation will go out. But this is basically, it's called a feelings wheel, and it shows different kinds of emotions. You can look this up on your own too. It's easy to find on Google. Just put in the feelings wheel. This one, though, is my personal favorite. It breaks down vocabulary of emotions and feelings in terms of strong, medium, and light. So if we look at depression, we'll see, for example, kind of a light-hearted depression is like disappointed. A strong one is empty. So if somebody tells you they're feeling empty versus they're feeling disappointed, feeling empty is a strong, strong word. If somebody says something like that to you, that's kind of a red flag should go off, because if you feel empty, that falls in line with like hopelessness. And, if you feel empty, what do you have to, what do you have, So, be mindful, pay attention to the words that people are using, because that can really tell you a lot. And again, I'm sorry you guys can't really see this very well. It's the vocabulary of emotions and feelings. You can Google it after if you're interested. And I do believe this presentation is going out to everyone, so hopefully you can just find it here. Some cultural considerations. So for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, those communities are more likely to experience environmental and systemic racism. Both are tied to poverty as well as decreased mental and physical health. BIPOC experience includes reduced availability and access to suicide prevention, which can increase risk due to lack of support. Limited offerings of culturally competent, linguistically, and intersectionality aware mental health treatment are available to these communities. Culture-related stigma against mental health treatment, e.g. values, morals, religious, or spiritual views, and cultural views about purpose of life and what happens after death. So, in other words, BIPOC communities are more likely to experience mental health trauma or mental health issues, and they're also less likely to be able to get help. So that's important to know. It's also important to know that when they do get help, that help is less likely to be culturally competent and aware of, the unique experiences of those groups, which can make it harder for them to get treatment. And also this culture-related stigma can also be seen within BIPOC families. So not necessarily from outside the community, but within the community. So like for me, when I was 16 and suicidal, nobody in my family really understood what to do or how to help me, because it's against our religion, it's against our family, it's against everything that they believe in. So they couldn't really help me. I got help from friends. But it's important to keep that in mind. Not everybody's going to be prepared to deal with it. Not everybody's going to know how to work with certain groups of people. So just be mindful that it may be more difficult to help people coming from certain cultural backgrounds. And also culture can be a protective factor. So these are kind of some, downsides that aren't really downsides, but just things to be aware of. But there are good things too. So family relations like closeness, openness, acceptance, family practices like family dinners, events, celebrations, values, morals, cultural beliefs that suicide is not the way out and that life has a purpose. I mentioned, a few seconds ago, for me, that didn't personally work out, but for others, it can. Religious, spiritual views, faith in God or a higher power, community relations, again, the closeness, openness, and acceptance, and community practices. So basically, if you have a positive culture that is connected, open, and accepting, you are way less likely to experience issues related to mental health and suicide. Us being there and being supportive of each other really goes a long way, whether that's in our family, with our friendship groups and our community, society at large, when we feel close to even just one person, that can change everything for the better. And then advocacy. All of us can be advocates for suicide prevention. Some things you can do: know the signs, know the resources and supports available in your community, promote education, support legislation, and attend public policy events. And down here are some trainings. So there's Safe Talk, Assist training. There is adult and youth mental health first aid trainings. There's multiple trainings from SPRC and Zero Suicide. I've done quite a few of these, if not all, and they're all excellent. I recommend that everyone does it. Some more resources. I'm not going to read them all, but there's a lot here. And each one of these websites you can go to and get a plethora of resources for you personally, for anybody who is maybe struggling, for your community, for your state, even if you want to advocate for better policies in your state regarding suicide. All that is in here. There's more information and more training. Sorry. One that I didn't mention on the other slide is CALM, Counseling on Access to Lethal Means. That one's really, really important for, especially if again, like we mentioned earlier, someone who has firearms, someone who has access to rope or anything like that they may use, even pills. This training will tell you how to, help that person put that stuff away and create a safer environment for themselves. And that is pretty much it. The rest is references. All done. I see stuff in the chat here. BJ said, wondering if also because those are labor-intensive jobs and see high turnover, unstable employment, and being sole provider can cause stress and anxiety. Yeah. So going back to, where is it? This. BJ made a great point. Yeah, so I didn't think about that, but high turnover, unstable employment, and just being intense labor, stress, anxiety, those are all great points as to why these may be such high risk positions. So yeah, great points, something to be mindful of. Ask a pet name. I'm not sure what that one was. Really.
Yeah, it's if you ask a person's pet names, they get connected a little bit more, and it will help with the ambivalence. If they're on the fence, they reconnect to the pet they love, and it grounds them a little bit more.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I might have briefly had pets as a protective factor on here, but that's a great point too. I hadn't thought of that.
You did. Ask their name.
Okay.
Ask the pet name. What's your pet's name?
Awesome. All right. So Emma, that's a really interesting statistic. I wonder if this is also due to the fact there was less people going to hospitals when they made an attempt on their life. So was that related to the COVID-19? I'm sorry, I didn't notice the chats until I was already done, but I think that might be what Emma was talking about. So during COVID-19, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so it was about the COVID-19 statistic. I was just wondering, because obviously if it's not gone up, I'm wondering why, considering the amount of mental health we see, right. And whether that's an actual statistic or whether it's kind of influenced by the fact that people weren't seeking support because of the pandemic, and also whether it's due to deaths being ruled as COVID-19 rather than suicide. So I know especially in England there was a lot of press about it, about how if you tested positive within 19 days, a death was automatically ruled as COVID-19 rather than cancer, suicide, things like that. So that's kind of what my message as well.
Those are great points. I completely forgot about that, but you're right. Yeah, if somebody had tested for positive for COVID-19, it was listed as a COVID-19 death. I did not think about that either, how that could have influenced the suicide rates. But Emma, that is a great great point. And also people not going. We were quarantined, we were locked down, people weren't leaving their house. Maybe they didn't go to get help because they were scared of contracting the virus, or just scared of getting in trouble for leaving. Yeah, those are all great points.
And I would just add that in the US, we had a lot of federal money tied to COVID. So, it could be a heart attack, but if they had COVID, it was getting tagged as COVID.
Yeah, great points. I'm curious. Yeah, hopefully we do get more information about that. I mean, it's only 2022, and some of these studies we might not even know about, maybe longitudinal studies going on that we don't know about yet, but hopefully we do get more information about what happened there, because during 2020, I swear I kept seeing on the news that suicide was going up and rates were going up, and then at I think it was like March 2021, we heard that wasn't true, and I was like, how is that not true? But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what else they come out with. Hopefully they can explain it a little better. Okay, so still going through the chats here. Pets as a protective factor, yes. Suleika, and I'm so sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I agree with Rick. I obtained a pet for a love who appeared to be suicidal, and the suicidal thoughts went away. Awesome. As Rick stated, the pet's release of attachment can demonstrate affection and fix the emotional well-being. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so that's great to hear. Pets as a protective factor, that does work for a lot of people. Just that companionship and having somebody there. And from what I hear, pets are really good about detecting like illnesses and things like that too. So I don't know, maybe they know when you're feeling down, and they know how to comfort you. That's awesome. So something to keep in mind if you know anybody who is having suicidal thoughts or something, maybe suggest that they get a pet and help them find a pet. I think that's the end of the chat. Did anybody want to unmute and ask any questions or anything like that?
Angelique, I just first wanted to pause and say thank you for putting all this amazing information together, because it really is a solid launching point for the talk that's happening tomorrow. And also, right, because Hear Me isn't, we're not crisis support. Like, we just do not have the resources to, on the other side of, once we've established someone is in crisis in this tech space, to then, do all the things that a crisis support would do. But I feel like this lends itself to expanding how we approach conversations when we're chatting with someone who is expressing suicidal ideation, and automatically, rather than just going, oh, crisis button, and ending the chat, maybe thinking about different kinds of questions we can ask to kind of determine, is this just a thing we need to actually be talking about and they need someone to kind of hold space? Or are we getting what we need, right, to articulate why we have to end the chat and what kind of information and resources that we're giving? So I just kind of wanted to say that as a start, and thank you for also sharing part of your own story and experience. But I also think, for me, I think about we haven't even talked about this on a global scale, right? A lot of this, with exception to what Emma mentioned, has been really kind of slated to the States. And so, I start thinking about mental health crises across the globe, because especially, Hear Me has a large usership in India. And so I think about what this just means overall in context. But at the end of the day, people are super having a hard time. And I think about also just being in the States, and with all the anti-trans legislation, which is kind of we talked about in Hear Me Out and other spaces, how we treat and care for each other just really seems to impact, how we move and experience this world. And so I really appreciate all these different factors and indicators that you brought to the forefront, because it's a solid refresher for me, but it's nice to have this at the forefront of my mind when I go into conversations and how I approach the rest of this week. So thank you very much. It was like a question and a statement, but not really a question. So you know how I do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Rick, I didn't know you were here until I was looking at the chat, but I'm glad you came. Everybody who came, I'm so glad you guys came. I really appreciate it. I had no idea what the turnout was going to be. So I was happy to see even 2-3 people that showed up. And Yeah, BJ made some great points. I focused on the US just because I'm from the US and that's what I know best. And to do the whole global, I feel like it would be overwhelming. But I would love to go back and do a more global perspective, especially because this is Hear Me and we do have such a big audience. But yes, going back to what you said about us not doing crisis chats, I think that even though we don't do crisis chats, like you said, sometimes people just need somebody to talk to, and sometimes that's enough. And, I have gotten some chats where I thought this might be a crisis chat, but just asking them, how are you feeling? And, even asking them, how are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 5 to see, is this really a crisis chat or not? And me getting that 3 and knowing, okay, I can handle this. I can talk to them. We don't always have to refer somebody to get crisis support. Sometimes we can handle it. Sometimes we can be that support for them. And I think that we all should try to be that support for them. And I hope this does help people. I don't know what everybody's education is or awareness is of suicide before seeing this, but I do hope if you just learn one thing from it, I hope that one thing helps somebody in the future. Yeah.
That's amazing. So I guess I'll just ask, we are like, Angelique somehow breezed through this. Does anyone have any other questions or anything they want to drop in the chat before we end early? Or if they need to unmute or anything like that, because they want.
Oh, I do see chat.
Okay. I see a bunch of thank yous and you're amazing.
Oh, it is thank yous. Oh, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all of you for coming. Thank you. I'm not a public speaker, you guys. Like, I'm so not a public speaker. And I'm sorry I couldn't present. Like, I should know where the present button is on PowerPoint by now, but I don't. I still don't know where it is. I will figure that out before I do my next presentation. So I apologize.
I feel like it's slideshow now, but don't quote me. But also you'll be back
on the
27th. And you'll be taking us through some, amazing information around mental health at the intersection of like Hispanic and Latina identity. So I think that's going to be a really great conversation. So y'all, if there is nothing else, I guess this is a wrap. And again, just send your accolades and thanks. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.